Welcome back. When we last left off, we were talking about a comparison of these two paintings, Madonna the Meadow by Raphael and Liberty Leading the People by Dellacroix. And so we had talked about how we had talked about color and some of the color organization ideas, although there's more I want to say about the color organization of the Raphael. We had talked a little bit about the triangular organization, that they both are organized centrally around a major large triangle, but they're doing it for very different effect. In the Raphael, it's a very kind of careful, composed, structural Renaissance triangle, and here in the Delacroix, it's a much more romantic, kind of steep, active, kind of breaking through kind of triangle, which matches the theme and the energy of the painting. Okay, so then we were talking about creating areas of focus, and I was going to point out that just like so many of the paintings that we see, the areas of light are some of the areas that draw the most attention. And it's just a natural thing in a lot of painting that, if you think about painting in a world where lighting was dark, interior lighting especially was dark, there's no such thing as electric lights. Um, people, you know, people in the Renaissance didn't get much in the way of suntans, so people are pale, skin is pale, and so it's natural that and of course, the people and the faces of people are going to be the things that you want to be the natural focuses of many of these paintings. So it's natural that that would kind of show up as ways of drawing our attention. Um, and in this case, it's like very much part of that triangle. The three areas of focus are John the Baptist, the baby Jesus, and Mother Mary. And we see a similar thing in Delacroix, although it's less about areas of light and more about areas of really strong contrast. If you think about it, this is a primary area of focus, and it's an area both of some of the lightest lights, but also an area of some of the darkest darks. And similarly, this draws our attention because of the really light lights, but it also has some dark darks. Um, so that's something to notice as slightly different. Also in the Delacroix, because the overall painting is kind of dark, kind of a mid-value dark, we have some places like here where a figure can draw our attention by being dark on top of an area that's overall kind of mid-light. Um, so that's a slight difference in the way the paintings are organized. Another thing about the color that I want to say about the Raphael is there's although it's dominated by the red and blue very strongly, the green of the landscape space is also extremely important, both for the fact that you can make the case that this makes this painting more of a triadic type organization, but also because the green helps to, as kind of a complementary relationship, helps to make the red feel more intense and lively. I think if you were to think about the overall way that color works in both these paintings, main thing we'd have to say is that it's overall a very colorful, like the Raphael's is overall a very colorful area with spots of greater light, right, that draw our attention. Whereas in the Delacroix, it's an overall kind of dark to dark mid-value painting with overall neutral colors, with then spots of both lights, spots of darks, and spots of really strong color, you know, as kind of like small moments throughout the painting that draw our attention from section to section. Um, okay, I think that's all I'm going to say about these two. All right, here's a very different kind of contrast. We have two much closer to non-objective type works. I think the painting by Joan Mitchell could safely be described as non-objective, whereas the painting by de Kooning, maybe not. Um, but some of the things that we can think about are some of the big organizations, right? The Joan Mitchell, although it may seem quite chaotic and disorganized, it is organized around a strong central diagonal. Um, Whereas the de Kooning is less so; it's more spots around, right, and almost seems completely overall. and even across. But the more you look at it, you start to realize it's very much a painting about the outside edges. You can almost start to see that there's like almost like a um, um, kind of a fisheye lens kind of quality to the whole piece, with the way the shapes get darker and smaller as they get towards the edges and towards the corners, and then so large kind of circular quality, and then that also emphasizes us continuously back to the center. So it's really very much a painting about the center and the edges, the relationship between the center and the edges. Um, and in terms of color organization, I think you can really look at the Joan Mitchell as being very much about complementary color organizations, and primarily like this kind of cyanish, kind of probably like a cerulean blue paired with these kind of more low and slightly lower intensity oranges that seem to be based off of like yellow ochre mixed with cadmiums. And then there are other like these kind of French ultramarine sort of colors that are more on the blue-violet side. They're part of that complementary relationship. And then on top of that, there's this sort of green to magenta relationship that we see over in this section. Whereas the color organization in the de Kooning is much more kind of like what I would describe as spot color, where it's overall dominated by these neutral colors. Overall, the neutral color being this kind of like this cream sort of color, this more kind of ivory white sort of color, and lots of kind of black and gray and browns. And then these few moments of spots. And one of the things you might notice the more you look at those spots of color is how many of them fall into sort of that triadic sort of organization of yellows, blues, and reds. But I think that that's less important than the idea of them just being spots, moments of color, and that the overall field of color is dominated by these kind of high value contrast but low color contrast relationships. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the rest of these comparisons a little bit faster, because otherwise we'll never get through this. I think this is going to be 4 parts. So here's a different kind of relationship. We have an acrylic painting by Mark Rothko on paper, and it's a very, very low contrast painting. Low contrast in terms of value, right? The value difference from this to that, right, is very low, and not much in the way of temperature contrast or even color contrast. That even in the grays, there's still a lot of violet kind of contained in there, and so it's a low, hue contrast, low color contrast, low value contrast, and even within the areas, like there's this warmer color that's kind of a orangish brownish sort of color coming through underneath this more violet color, but the relationship between the two of them is also not strong in terms of value contrast, which makes then the warm cool relationship between them all the more subtle and beautiful. Whereas overall there's just a lot more color contrast in general in the Hans Hofmann, a lot more value contrast. We have very, very dark colors in areas, very, very light colors in area. Also, the composition is much more active, right? We have things organized on diagonals, as well as a diagonal going in this direction. You can see some thought about the corner going this way, and a lot more hue in general. Obviously, the orange and the kind of cooler green seem to be the most dominant colors, but there are lots of other colors, from magentas to reds, all the way through the painting. And then also in terms of the composition, like I said, even though some of these elements are very rectilinear and they're kind of grid-based organized, the overall movement and action of the painting is very, very active. Whereas in the Rothko, the movement of the painting is quite still, right? Okay, we'll move on. All right, so we're back to more figurative painting. So we're going to try to see just the compositional